Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of 2024 from the Institute of Export and International Trade, looking at trade opportunities and challenges for the UK's food and drink industry in the year ahead. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host today. And I'm delighted to be bringing you this delectable feast of a webinar, covering a wide range of issues and challenges for this most vital of sectors to the UK economy. According to figures from the Food and Drink Federation, or FDF, food and drink is the UK's largest manufacturing sector, and it certainly includes many of our biggest exporters. However, the sector is currently dealing with myriad challenges, whether that's the impacts of the Red Sea and Panama Canal crises, the aftershocks of the pandemic and wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, the impact of climate, the grappling with post-Brexit regulatory changes. Indeed, on the next slide, you'll see that today's webinar follows hot on the heels of a recent white paper from the Institute titled BTOM and Beyond, which outlines the 20 or so changes that are due to come into effect over the next 12 to 18 months. Of particular relevance to today's audience, this includes the Border Target Operating Model, or BTOM. We'll today be touching on BTOM and some of the other changes that are outlined in that paper, and you can find a link to it in the chat. However, the next slide. It is my delight to start introducing to you today our fantastic panelists for this webinar. And I should start by saying that we're going to run this webinar across two panels. The first will look at the regulatory and supply chain challenges faced by food and drink importers. And I'm delighted that joining this panel are Laura Williams, a customs and trade consultant at the Institute, who is also our lead in delivering training on sanitary and phytosanitary rules and processes. Ian Mace is the head of government affairs and policy at Associated British Foods, who has had many different finance and policy related roles at ABF over the years, and is also a chartered accountant who trained at KPMG. James Beringer is a corporate affairs and trade policy executive at FDF, where he's led member engagement and advocacy around the Border Target Operating Model. And Katrina Walsh, who is strategy director at the International Meat Trade Association and has vast experience in the meat and livestock sector, both in the UK and in Europe. After this panel, on the next slide, you'll see that the remainder of this webinar will look at the opportunities ahead this year for exporters. Laura and Ian will stay with us for this panel and will be joined by T. Sandhu, the co-founder of Samosaco and a member of the Food and Drink Exports Council. For those that don't know, the Council is a collaborative expert committee co-chaired by the Department of Business and Trade with Industry, focused on boosting UK food and drink exports, something that is definitely of relevance for today's webinar. Before the first panel discussion though, on the next slide, you'll see we're going to run our first poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we are here asking, do you agree with the statement? And the statement being, I am familiar with the BTOM milestones and deadlines which will affect my business. Options ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. As you are answering that poll, as ever, some quick housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window, and that's usually to the top right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today, though please note we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated time. As such, I will be prioritizing questions that have relevance to the wider audience, and I won't be going into company or sector-specific queries as such, beyond food and drink anyway. Please note that if your questions are short and clear, I am more likely to be able to read them. Finally, you will receive a recording of the webinar with a copy of the slides in a follow-up email we will be sending to you in the coming days. So thank you to everyone who has so far answered the poll. I'll give you a couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And let's see the results. So most of you either agree or strongly agree with that statement. 45% of you just agreed, a tenth of you saying strongly. Still though, almost a half of you, 44% of you don't agree with that statement. A third of you disagreeing, a tenth of you strongly disagreeing. So that is very mixed response, and the first milestone is only a couple of weeks away. So a really revealing response there. Thank you everyone for honest answers. If we move to the next slide, I'd like to bring on our first panel, Laura, Ian, James, and Katrina. And Laura, if I could begin with yourself, and you can comment on the result of that first poll as part of this. But could you begin the discussion more broadly by recapping what is the border target operating model, particularly for new rules that are coming in at the end of the month because of it?
So the border target operating model is predominantly putting in place the new SPS rules that were delayed in April last year. So they are coming in a phased implementation. Originally, it was due to come in October last year, but they had been delayed until the 31st of January. The first phase brings in our documentary checks. So these are all the documents that we require, whether it be an export health certificate for animal and animal byproducts, or whether it be a phytosanitary certificate for our plant products, or even a catch certificate for our fish products. So what will actually start happening is there will be border force agents that will be reviewing digitally the uploaded documents within the IPAF system, which is our new system created to deal with this new implementation, and it replaces Peaches. So we will be starting to see that the documentation is actually reviewed both physically and digitally by our border force teams and also by the designated specialists. This is going to be quite a change because we have been receiving the documentation, but there has really been no standardised checking of this documentation as yet.
Thank you, Laura. And I mean, some of those rules coming in 31st of January, 56% of people said they were familiar with that, but 44% weren't. Is that a cause for concern?
It is, but unfortunately, it is the general feedback we're getting from not only our members, but from the industry in general. There's been so many changes. It really is hard for businesses to keep up with exactly what the requirements are at this point in time. We do go through these within our sort of BTOM lunchtime learning sessions as well, but there aren't many places you can go to get clear clarification for businesses, almost just a checklist really of what they need to do. And that's what they really are asking for is, can't we just make it simple? Tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And I think that's really reflected in the answers we got from the question today.
Thank you, Laura. Making it simple always sounds a good idea to me. But I mean, James and then Katrina, I mean, how are your members feeling about these upcoming changes? And what do you foresee as being the main challenges that these changes present? So beginning with you, James.
So thanks for having me on the panel. So broadly speaking, when it comes to the policy itself, our members have been supportive of the policy. We think it is quite an innovative approach to SPS risk that has been taken, certainly more proportionate than you would see going in the other direction towards the EU. Our main concerns really about the pragmatic implementation of the policy throughout 2024. So breaking it down to the January and April dates, for January, our members not seeing too many concerns. I think we've been reassured enough by government that any enforcement of that first phase is going to be fairly light touch. I mean, the main risk, I think, is that there is possibility that certain smaller suppliers from the EU will take a look at the requirements. Getting an EHC is quite expensive and decide it's not worth their money to actually continue supplying the UK. But from a broad perspective, the actual flow of goods across the border shouldn't be too disrupted. There are a few things that could be done to make this a bit smoother. So we do have a commodity code lookup tool that allows you to see what risk category your goods are in. That one is limited. It's not got all the commodity codes under there. That could be expanded and include rest of world goods as well. That would be good. And I think going back to what Laura said earlier, the process by which information is conveyed has been challenging. In particular, we've been looking at the designation of border control posts and the way that that's communicated. There have been some changes, but it was very difficult to see when and where they were made. Some of these bits of information are on gov.uk websites, which are challenging to access. When it comes to the 31st of April, the 30th of April deadline, there are a few more outstanding concerns. I think the main one is going to be fees, and how much this is going to cost. We're awaiting a consultation response, but under current proposals for a common user charge, that will affect SMEs quite significantly. if you're being charged on each line of your customs declaration, you can quickly start to rack up fees very, very quickly. There's also ongoing questions about the BCP at Sevington versus the one at Dover. The intention is for things to go through Sevington, but we're not sure about what the next steps are or what the timelines are. This is having a major impact on business planning. But there are some opportunities as well here. I think that broadly speaking, it can level the playing field between EU imports and rest of world imports. That's quite an important aspect for resilience and supply chains. Millions of products that are coming in rest of the world with checks are now into that low risk status. I think there is an opportunity for this to stimulate more discussions with the EU about how the DCA works. I think the SPS trusted trader schemes are another innovative approach, although it's difficult to see at the moment what the benefits of joining it will be because the check rates have also not been announced. But in theory, it's a principle that we would be supportive of. And of course, the single trade window and digitization will continue throughout 2024, which we are supportive of. So there are some opportunities, but definitely some concerns about how the implementation of this is going to go.
And Katrina, if I can bring you in at this stage as well, I mean, in terms of your members, how are they responding? Because I assume a lot of your members will be dealing with things like expert health certificates and stuff like that, which will be broadly new to them for EU trade.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So for anybody unfamiliar with the International Meat Trade Association, we're a membership organisation representing UK-based importers and exporters of meat, as well as some of those in the wider supply chain. And we have members importing from around the world, for instance, from South America and Thailand, and exporting British product overseas, for example, to markets in Asia and Africa. Generally, the products that we import and export are different. For instance, British consumers have a preference for cuts like chicken breasts and steaks, and we tend to export things like offal and chicken feet, which aren't as popular here. We actually have a page on our website you can visit with graphics illustrating why that is and kind of explaining the concept of carcass balance. However, many of our members do import and export with the EU, so the BTOM is really critical to them. Product from the EU tends to be chilled, and therefore shelf life is a really important consideration for members. And the biggest thing and the biggest concern is that they want to avoid any delays from this implementation, delays to transport times, introduction checks and things that can build delays into the process of bringing the product in. Trade from the EU tends to work in a kind of just-in-time basis, which isn't the case for rest of world trade, so they're not directly comparable. And we have already seen the imposition of checks on our exports to the EU, but in terms of imports to GB, we're going to be dealing with 27 different member states, and that adds layers of complexity, because that can mean that groupage consignments, which can pass through multiple member states, can involve multiple veterinary authorities, which can, add in delays to the process and general confusion. So I do want to really underline that imports are an important part of our food supply, so we really need to get this program right. In terms of the challenges from members, I think the main one that stands out is the lack of some crucial information at this late stage. They would have needed to see a lot of these things months ago in order to help for preparedness, so we do have concerns there. Some of the information that we're missing in relation to the 31st of January date is when the export health certificates and translations are going to be uploaded to Traces, the computer system. Whether the UK assessment of EU certifier capacity, so the actual certifiers producing the documentation that we need, does that take into account the in-country location and daily availability of the certifiers? We also want to know what is going to be the case for companies that are unable to pre-notify 1 working day in advance due to geographical or other constraints. What action should they be taking? And we would also like to know what 24-hour support will be provided by government around this key deadline to support traders with the changes. From the 31st of April, when the actual physical checks come in, I think we need to remember that that's not that far away. It's the second section, but it's coming up quite soon. We still don't know what the actual frequency of identity and physical checks is going to be on EU and rest of world imports, which is such crucial information to preparing. And we have detailed questions around how groupage is going to operate. If one consignment on a groupage truck is required to attend a BCP, what happens to the rest of that product? We need to know more about which border control posts are going to allow a 4-hour derogation to pre-notification. So the default would be 1 working day, but you can get a derogation to 4 hours, but only under certain circumstances. And we need to know more about the computer links between CDS, ALVS, GVMS, and IPAFs. Those systems all have to work together well to avoid kind of systems falling over and delays. We need more information on the driver messaging system and what languages that's going to be provided in, as well as lab capacity and the level of the common user charge that James mentioned there. But I don't want to be too negative. There are some great opportunities here. From April, we're going to see changes on import from rest of world as well as EU. So the risk categorization allows certain goods, such as shelf-stable meat, to dispense with the need for physical checks and export health certificates, although they do still need to be pre-notified. And imports from beef from New Zealand and sheep meat from Australia have been categorized as low risk, which will make importing from those long-standing trade partners a lot less burdensome from an admin perspective. And we are expecting the levels of checks on ID and physical checks on medium risk imports from rest of world to decrease, but we don't know to what level. And that would reduce costs to make the system more risk-based. And our members have been calling that for a long time and wanted these more proportionate checks. That's everything from me.
Thank you, Katrina. So there's a lot of information there which we're still looking for in the next 2 weeks. So yeah, hopefully that will come in some way or another, but also some positives as well. I just want to run a quick poll actually, just to kind of get a sense of from the audience which area of BTOM you're finding most challenging at the moment. There's some options there to respond to. I'll pick up at some point just on the export health certificate side from the EU side, because I think that's a really interesting area of this. But I want to bring in Ian at this point as well. Great to have you on the panel as well. I mean, how is Associated British Food preparing for these BTOM changes coming in very shortly?
Thanks, William, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this. So we're quite fortunate at ABF in that most of the products that we deal with are shelf-stable composites, either low or risk or even exempt from some of the requirements. But there are a number of ingredients that we rely on that are coming in that will be significantly impacted. And I suppose the simple answer is talk to your suppliers a lot. So one of the things that we did quite early on was to sort of reach out to our suppliers in the EU and just ask them, are you ready for the changes? And perhaps not surprisingly, most of them just replied yes and didn't really give us any more detail. So I think the advice I would give to anybody who's had that sort of answer is to start asking lots and lots and lots of other questions. If your supplier doesn't proactively tell you all the detail about how they are preparing, ask them details. So ask them if they've able to send the pre-notification that is required. Ask them to see an example copy. Ask them if they have arranged for the EHCs that they need to be signed off. Ask them if that is available 7 days a week, or are they going to have to change their delivery pattern to you to meet the new requirements, and so on. So just the more questions you ask, the more detail they will have to give you. And if they can't give you that detail, that's the time to start pushing them to think a bit harder about preparing.
Thank you, Ian. And just to share the results of that poll, thank you everyone again for responding. 39% of people saying ensuring EU suppliers obtain the needed certification is the top concern, followed by changes to declaration processes. We've had a couple of people comment just about the concern around EU suppliers not being able to get access to official veterinarians in the EU from the animal origin side of it. And there's official certifiers needed for plant-based as well, I'm sure. So, I mean, Katrina, just on this point, what's the latest you're hearing in terms of the concern around EU suppliers and also the reported shortage of available official veterinarians?
Yes, so it is an area that we are concerned about. Providing an EHC, it's quite a complicated process. It needs to be a trained vet that does it. And, we'd like to think that the readiness analysis that we've seen so far is correct, but I am really quite worried in terms of those vets being available on the spot where the actual information needs to be put through, as well as their availability for, late night loadings at the weekend. It's about this kind of almost 24-hour process on bringing stuff in from the EU, and all the certification has to work around that. And, we're just not used to it. So we really have to see how this is going to go.
Thank you, Katrina. We've had a few questions coming on BTOM from the floor, but before I go on to that, I mean, it's not the only issue affecting supply chains this year. So I just wanted to ask a broader question. We're hearing a lot about the impacts of the Red Sea crisis at the moment on shipping routes. And in previous years, obviously, the war in Ukraine has had a significant impact on supply chains. And a trend we've seen over the last few years is this prioritization of supply chain resilience being a really key trend, particularly in the food and drink sector. I just want to ask to all the panel, really, do you see this as continuing to be the other main trend for the sector? And what other trends could you foresee being important over the next year or so? So if I start that on with James, do you want to come in about one first?
Yes, I do. To answer your question, that is going to be something that is going to be a major talking point throughout 2024 and beyond. I think over the last couple of years, as you said, there have been a number of shocks to supply chains. I think what the government is trying to do here with this import regime will help with that resilience. I think when we talk about resilience, what we should be thinking about is the flexibility to change should things go wrong. Putting rest of world imports and so on a level playing field, the EU ones, does give you a certain degree of flexibility going forward that you might not have had before. I think there are other ways the government can help with resilience. One of them is a reform to the duty suspension process. So for those of you unaware, that's a process by which tariffs can be temporarily suspended on goods where there is no domestic production in the UK. Since leaving the EU, we've had one round. The EU's had three, for instance, and it's a very, very difficult process to engage with, but it is an important aspect of resilience to shore up those supply chains when there are shocks. So yes, definitely something to watch out for in 2024.
Thank you, James. And Ian, do you want to come in with this one from the business perspective? Kind of, what other trends are you seeing? Is supply chain resilience kind of the main one from your end?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely high on the list. I think there are becoming more and more tools available that you can use to help monitor the risks there. So we've got some AI tools that we're sort of testing and starting to use in our business, for example, that highlights disruption to supply chains, whether that's in the shipping or the production or weather events or, sadly, of course, conflict. I think that is key. It obviously does add cost to supply chains as well, and you know, the more inventory you need to hold as a safety stock, the more challenging that is. And that's obviously one of the reasons why the EU is such an important trade partner, having that capability. I suppose the other bit, just to bear in mind, yes, I would agree with James that having sort of flexibility across supply chains from different sourcing regions is really helpful. But of course, there are quite strict labelling requirements on some of those things. So you know, having flexibility throughout your supply chain is important, not just sort of the overall logistics piece, but also the ability to amend packaging at short notice if required and everything else that goes with it. So yes, all aspects of resilience are definitely high up the list.
Thank you, and just bring Katrina in on this. I mean, you mentioned just in case supply chains with the EU earlier, but I mean, would it be fair to say that there's been a kind of a bit of a trend from just in case just in time to just in case supply chains in your sector in particular?
I think currently people are still running that just-in-time model where, you know, they decide they need supply for that week and they make their orders. So we really want the BTOM to work around that model and allow that to continue. The product that we bring in from the EU, as I mentioned, you know, that can be chilled product, which obviously has shelf life concerns, where the product that we bring from certain other countries, particularly on the poultry meat side, would be frozen. So there is a bit more leeway, not much, but a little bit. So we really need to make sure the BTOM is adaptable and able to keep those supply chains going, because the consumer has, you know, grown used to being able to get fresh poultry meat and other fresh meat. And we don't want to see any decline in availability of product for consumers.
Perfect. Thank you, Katrina. I'm conscious it's good to get some time in for some user questions now at this stage. So let's get a question over to James and Laura potentially. This is one from Sally, who says, how could BTOM rule changes impact the cost of imports from the EU, particularly certification costs? So you mentioned costings earlier a little bit, but I mean, do you guys have any kind of rough sense of kind of the potential specific kind of cost impacts? Are we talking tens of pounds, or is it kind of hundreds of pounds per consignment? What is the broad cost as far as you're seeing it at the moment? I don't know, James, do you want to come in on that first?
I think when it comes to the costing, there's the things we know about and there's the things we don't know about. And I think the things that we don't know about are probably the ones causing more concerns. So there is obviously the cost involved with getting the EHC and getting that signed by the vet, depending on where you are. But I'd just like to reiterate the point about fees in general for BCPs, just because we don't know what those are going to be. Under the common user charge proposal, it could come down to paying a charge per item that's in your in the load that you're bringing over. So if you say you're bringing over a small load but that contains 10 different items of it, you could be paying £100, which might be more than that actual load is worth. So that's the one I think where there's the most concern, because one, we don't actually know what's going to happen, and two, that can be potentially very, very, very disproportionately impacting on SMEs.
I think one of the other things to point out is that the groupage information, along with, say, for example, organics, we are still expecting more clarification in February, so that gives us loads of time to get ready. I know we like just-in-time movements, but unfortunately, we are finding that in this case, we're getting just-in-time information. The government have estimated, and I do say estimated with a pinch of salt, that the expected cost per movement is £143. Where they have come up with that figure, they have yet to been able to disclose, but they estimate per SPS movement the additional cost will be 143, approximately.
If I might jump back in there as well.
Please do.
There are also a few additional costs that might be brought about just by the implementation of the system. For example, not allowing a 4-hour derogation, for instance, means that certain businesses will need to have stuff stop and be stored in ports before it can then make its way across the UK. There's obviously costs in terms of the logistics as well. But yeah, back to you, Laura.
I imagine that the unforeseen costs will be on top of the approximate 143, unfortunately. And I think this goes back to both what James and Katrina were saying earlier. This really could discourage our independent, our organic, our small farmers, our small independent producers to actually choose not to continue working with the UK as a market. And we may actually genuinely see a reduction of options available on our shelves, especially when it comes to the more unusual products.
I mean, if I could come in there with a question we've had in from Lucas, who says, we are a small retailer and we import lots of goods from small producers in Poland and Hungary. What should we be saying to our suppliers to ensure that they're ready? So, I mean, I guess those are potentially the sort of producers which we might be seeing less of if it's not cost effective for that to happen. But I mean, to Lucas's question, Laura, what should he be saying to his suppliers in both countries?
To firstly make sure that they establish a relationship between them and their local health authority. Make sure they find out who is their assigned veterinarian for both their product and their local area. Make sure that they are booking in slots for that veterinarian in advance, because this really does go back to what Katrina was saying. There is a general shortage throughout Europe of certified official veterinarians to issue export health certificates. So companies are actually booking weeks in advance and then cancelling if not required, just so that they have the availability option. And they're paying cancellation fees to do so. But it's the only way at the moment they're feeling that they can operate. So making sure that they have those established relationships, understanding the requirements for those documentations. There are so many different types of export health certificates. Making sure you're getting the right one issued is half the problem. Making sure you have access to traces and you're able to upload the documentation. You have a good relationship with your freight forwarder or your haulier. that they understand the requirements of your goods, the time constraints, especially if you're moving chilled goods. It's all about communication, a clear process plan and redundancies in place for when things don't go right, which sounds nice and simple on paper, but as we all know in this realistic world of logistics and supply chain, all it takes is for there to be one delay on the motorway, or for there to be a mechanical issue with the vehicle, or you know, a crossing gets cancelled because the weather isn't particularly accessible, and it can make quite an impact. So it's all about making sure that you have very clear plans in place, but always having a backup.
Thanks, Laura. And just conscious of time, so I just wanted to give Katrina, is there anything you want to add on those kind of points around potential cost impacts and how they may be felt by smaller importers in particular?
Yeah, I think when talking about smaller businesses, a really key thing I would mention is groupage. I know, Laura, you've mentioned it. That process tends to be used by smaller companies that can't afford to, bring a whole truck or hire a whole truck just to bring their goods in. So they share trucks, share space on them. And there's a lot of information missing. So there is information out there, but things like what happens in a practical level when the product, one of the consignments on the truck is getting pulled for BCP checks and your product's also on that truck. If it's chilled, is it going to be sitting around? Is it going to be offloaded? Who offloads it? Who pays for that? And these are all questions that we need way more detailed guidelines from. And I think that would provide confidence to those suppliers on the EU side you mentioned that are maybe a bit scared of what's happening. If they really knew that the model could continue and in what way, that might make them more inclined to continue. So I think that's a really key point of information we need more on.
I mean, I can certainly tell you what was originally published with regards to groupage, but the feedback back through the CCC committee and up to the government was this isn't going to work for groupage. So they turned around and said, just like organics, we're going to extend things until February and we'll give you further clarification. Now, as it stands right now, if you have a groupage truck and it only has one SPS product in it and it's selected for inspection, everything gets stopped. And that's just not acceptable. So groupage have gone back and said, we need alternatives. We need ways to be able to work around this. We need access to temporary storage facilities in order for our other goods to be able to be moved on while this one is being reviewed. So we are hoping to get further clarification on that, but I agree at the moment groupage is probably one of the areas that is the most unclear. Probably we actually use the majority of to move our certainly our consumer SPS products that we order, not necessarily our larger businesses such as our main 6 supermarkets within the UK. But certainly within your local bespoke butchers, for example, or even the restaurant industry, they won't necessarily require a whole truck. So these are the areas where we will see an impact. And we are still waiting for further clarification. We have been told to expect that within the first 2 weeks of February. And I'm sure that as soon as we have further information, William and his team will be sending out some press releases to help clarify that to yourselves and to our members. And hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more of a concession for what is essentially one of our main ways of moving goods in and out of the UK.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, of course, the IUE team will be informing our members and our wider trader community of these changes, and I'm sure we'll be seeing similar from the likes of FDF and IMTA and all the other kind of sector bodies as well. But at this point, we do have another side to the trade process to get through in the second half of the webinar. So thank you so much to our first panel. Some really important points raised there. A lot of work to be done over the next 2 weeks and beyond around these BTOM changes, but also a lot going on in the broader supply chain space as well. So thank you to James and Katrina for your thoughts on the first panel. Sadly, they can't join us for the second one, but we'll have hear a bit more from Laura and Ian in a moment. Before we move on to the second panel, just a quick note on the next slide. But if you do need more information about BTOM and how it will impact your business, and you are a member of the Institute, make sure to come along to our lunchtime learning webinar on Thursday this week, looking into the sanitary and phytosanitary rules and processes that are coming in on 31st of January in a little bit more detail. If you're not a member of ours, the Lunchtime Learning Programme is a series of webinars we do for our members that gives practical details of various trade and customs processes and rule changes. If you still need more information following both of these two webinars this week, then please do look at the Institute's wider offering to members. You can also get access to our technical helpline if you're a business member, and that's access to some real hands-on practical guidance on your technical issues from our team of experts, people like Laura. And you can also get a range of other benefits such as networking opportunities, exclusive guides and insights, discounts to SPS and excise training courses, and much more. I'll be sharing the slide pack after the webinar, and I'll include some links in the chat shortly as well. But to keep you all engaged, to get your mouses moving, just another quick poll question, if I may. This one asking, are you apprehensive about the new EU-UK trade rules coming into force this year? Again, it's strongly agree to strongly disagree. While you're answering that poll, I should say we do use this information that we gather in polls like the ones today and across our membership occasion, including those lunchtime learnings, to inform our advocacy with government. The Institute acts as a key interlocutor between government and the international trade industry on all things trade and customs. We sit on various key committees and respond to lots of ongoing public consultations on key policy developments, whether that's BTOM, the single trade window, free trade agreements, the new CBAM potentially, and the voluntary standards for customs intermediaries, and much, much, much more. So please do engage with us on these key issues. The polls are a great chance to do that, but also there are other ways as well, so do get in touch. I'll leave that poll open for 3, 2, 1. Thank you again, everyone, for responding. It's really important information. So a lot of you do feel apprehensive. 54% of you agree, 21% of you strongly agree. So that's a pretty strong majority. A quarter of you disagree. So that really does show how much work there is to be done over the next few weeks. Thank you, everyone, for responding. Right, that's enough of me rambling on. Let's talk exports on the next slide. So our second panel, I'm delighted to welcome back Ian and Laura, and also welcome to T. Sandhu from Samosa and the Food and Drink Exports Council. Great to have you with us, T. Laura, if I could start with you again, what are the main opportunities as you see them for UK exporters in 2024? And what are the kind of major growth markets and also, sorry, bit of a loaded question, what impact can you see the UK's post-Brexit trade deals as having?
I think the UK has some clear advantages. We have some products that are worldwide renowned. You know, one of the most commonly that's referred to is Scottish salmon, for example. We also have our Cornish cider. We have Welsh lamb to compete against the lamb that comes in from New Zealand. You know, these are all really high standard products. I think the more opportunities we actually get to export those on a fair and easier to understand, a non-biased. So in other words, the same rules that apply for us sending it to Spain will apply for us sending it to Italy, will apply to us sending it to, you know, anywhere else within the EU. So from that perspective, it should expand our opportunities and it should put us all on a level playing field. We have a tremendous amount of products in the food and drink sector that we should be exporting because they are some of the best available products on the market. We just have a lot of companies that have never been in a position where they've ever had to export before. They were established once we were already within the European Union. They've only ever had to deal with the standard shipping documentation. And the new export requirements for them are quite daunting, and they also can be quite costly. So I think the more support we can give to expand our export market, the better we will be from an international perspective. And also to help decrease our trade deficit can only benefit the UK.
Thank you, Laura. And it'd be great to get a business perspective as well. So T, great, thank you for joining us today. Just from your perspective, kind of where are you seeing the opportunities this year?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks for having me. Actually, you know, touching upon what Laura just said just now, that there is some amazing producers in this country making amazing food and drink, and a lot of them are sort of smaller micro businesses, and they should really be exporting those to different markets. And it can look like it can be daunting for a lot of businesses with all these new rules and changes that are coming into place. But within that, and I think there are some great opportunities. I think you touched upon on some of the challenges that we had before, such as supply chain and everything else, but there are great opportunities. And I think if we look at some of the new markets that open up for businesses and for particular type of product, you know, Laura, you mentioned products like salmon, you know, even whiskey, things like that. These are high quality, high export potential. And they're gaining access into new markets again. We look at agreements for, you know, such as Australia or the CP. We're looking forward to things like the CPTPP and even India, where, you know, Scotch is now starting to make a windfall into. So the opportunities are there, and so it's only an exciting time to get involved and to have your food and drink export. I think it's an exciting time. I think, you know, we kind of also have to look at bypassing some of the media rhetoric as well, and still look at the EU and Europe as being vitally important. Last year I went to Paris for a trade event and met with buyers there, and this year I'm heading over to Tableau in Belgium, and buyers, distributors, agents, whoever they are, they're still really keen to do business with UK producers and companies, because they know the demand for our product is there. So I think sometimes we may look at some areas that you know, that could be an issue or could be daunting for us to go into, but I would just say, look, have a chat with those guys, and they're really keen to speak to you and for your products. And you know, within that, I'd also say, it was funny, I've spoken to a couple of businesses already in the last few weeks, and they have had inquiries from a few markets and buyers in, you know, for markets that they weren't even targeting actually. They had inquiries for their products, and so what I would say is just sort of broaden your horizons a little bit, and actually realize that there is potential and growth there. So it's not all doom and gloom. I'd say there's some real fantastic opportunity.
Terrific, thank you, T. Broadening horizons, that should be a theme for the year, hopefully. But I mean, Ian, to bring in the kind of larger business kind of perspective as well, I mean, what are you seeing as the opportunity for the year ahead?
So I mean, we're really excited by some of the opportunities that are out there. So certainly some of the new trade agreements are helping in places like Australia and New Zealand. We hope that the revised deal with Canada will be helpful. India is a huge opportunity for high quality branded sort of food exports. So I suppose just to counter that enthusiasm slightly, we are seeing the technical requirements, so the legal, the labeling, the packaging requirements in many markets become more challenging over time. But there are lots of people out there who can help you with that. People who, you know, are experts in addressing certain markets, or will advise smaller businesses on how to make a foothold. And the UK government is putting more people on the ground in overseas embassies as well, and some of those have got specific food exports from the UK, and they can provide access to the technical expertise on the ground that businesses need. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity for high quality, unique brands and products in many markets, and as the world grows and develops and economic development continues in many parts of the world, people are more interested in those quality products. It's a huge opportunity for the UK.
Thank you both. The labelling point is really important, and we'll come back to the kind of practical considerations in a moment. But it's really interesting. You mentioned the deals, Australia, New Zealand, of course, you mentioned, but also CPTPP. I think I got that right. Kind of a mass agglomeration of kind of really high growth markets in the Pacific area. mean, just out of interest, T and Ian, to what extent are the trade deals or new partnerships like the UK, to what extent are they driving your kind of decisions on kind of where to kind of go to for exports, or kind of how much is it that actually these are the markets you would export to anyway, and that these trade deals are now becoming important support mechanisms?
Sure.
T, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of both. I think when we look at sort of new markets, obviously trade deals help. They certainly do. I think a trade deal wouldn't really be much of a hindrance, especially to our product. I mean, it can depend on what you've got and what you're trying to sell. But I'd also say not having a trade agreement or trade deal with a certain market wouldn't put us off. If we've identified and done our research into a certain market that we know where our products will sell quite well, we'd endeavour to still try and do it. We wouldn't sort of delay it or bypass it just because there's a new agreement with a new market. So I think it's a little bit of both for us. I think because we're from a small business perspective, we really hone in and target about the certain key partners that we work with, whether that could be an agent, distributor, or a retailer. And I think that harnesses a bit more influence on what we would do rather than the whole trade agreement itself for particular markets.
And Ian, anything to add to that? Or?
No, I think the most important question is about the market, not the existence or not of a trade deal. You have to know that the consumers in the place you're targeting are interested in your types of products. But then once that happens, I think, once you've got those markets identified, then trade deals, can remove barriers or competitive in local markets. And new trade deals also give a bit of a profile to imports from the UK. So each time there's a new trade deal, there's a bit more interest from the people, the customers in those markets in sourcing from the UK, and that's helpful sort of.
Hey, thanks, Ian. It dropped off a couple of times in that, but I think the overall kind of message is trade agreements are useful, but the main thing is really forgive a pun, the appetite for your products in these markets, and these markets might be particularly, the ones we've just signed trade deals with, they might be particularly hungry for UK products following the announcements of trade deals. That's terrible puns, I'm very sorry. Let's get into the practicalities then. So Laura, we've had a few questions come in just off the back of a few things which have been said. So Tricia has asked a question around kind of, is there a list of experts in food labelling and packaging? Just broaden that a little bit, kind of where can people get support or find out about the information we need to when it comes to labelling and packaging requirements?
So there are different labelling and standardised packaging, depending on what your product is and what market it is actually geared for. So obviously we have the Food Standards Agency in the UK, and each governing body or each market has their own requirements. So if you're looking to export your goods, you need to review that particular market. So if we were looking to export to Australia, for example, we would need to contact their equivalent in order to see what their marketing standards are. Now, we do have links that through the government website. They do advise you where to find that information. It is a bit cumbersome, which I think is how we all feel about the government website. It's never easy. So what I can do is just put some standard information together for you, Will, to put within that link package that you'll send out.
Thank you, Laura. That'd be definitely helpful. Another question that's come in from John is actually around back to EU trade. So he's noted that getting samples into EU by FPO is an issue. So he's talking about Germany, Italy, Spain, and France in particular. I know this has been an issue in general, kind of samples of sample exports. Kind of what's the latest on that, and how can businesses get the info they need on samples?
Right. So samples has been something we've been getting a lot of feedback from with regards to difficulty. Now, what you have to understand with samples is they are not allowed to be in what is classified as a sellable packaging or sellable condition. So I take a box of biscuits as an example. Those biscuits can't be all neatly packaged within their little little slots, those biscuits will need to be broken up. They can't be ready for sale condition. If you're sending clothes, for example, clothes actually have to have either cuts in them or slashes across them, so they're not wearable. If you are sending a liquid product, you can send them in the bottle that you would usually sell it in, but the label would not allow to be attached. That would need to be set separately in the box, and that way it's not a sellable product. It would also clearly need to be marked sample, which can be written by hand or incorporated within a label for that product in order not to get applicable for duty and VAT. It also needs to be clearly marked as sample within all of the documentation as well. But the key factor is it cannot be in retail ready, sellable packaging or sellable condition.
And Laura, one last practical question before I move on to a question for T. We talked about trade deals. They obviously support reduced tariffs or nil tariffs on imports into different countries, but it's not that simple, is it? There's origin rules and all sorts to comply with as well. Could you just talk a bit to those?
I won't go too far into it because rule of origin is actually the most complex subject within the whole of customs. I lovingly refer to it as going down the rabbit hole. It is entirely independent on that free trade agreement, and each free trade agreement is independent. No two free trade agreements are the same, and they are allowed to implement whichever rules of the 8 that are applicable and available. They can implement 4, they can implement all 8, and how they interpret those can be independent. And they will have product specific rules. So you may be importing a specific commodity from one region, and then when you go to import it, say from Australia, who have a different free trade agreement, there will be different product specific rules attached to that product in order for you to be able to claim preference due to origin. So it really is a very complex subject. One of the tools that HMRC have put together is an advanced origin ruling, and these really are quite handy to have. They're free of charge. They take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete the application through the government gateway, and they do not reflect in any negative way on your HMRC record, and they give you reassurance and a legally binding publication from HMRC on the origin of your goods.
I think that's probably about as far as you can go into origin without it being a whole day training course in and of itself, which we do, interestingly enough. Anyway, T, you've come and you've representing the government's Food and Drink Exports Council today as part of this webinar. So I was wondering, could you say a little bit more about what the council is doing in 2024 and the importance of government and industry working together to ensure export opportunities are realised this year?
Yes, well, thanks. So the Food and Drink Export Council is a committee. It's co-chaired by DBT and industry. So it's focused on sort of boosting UK food and drink exports. Co-chaired by the Minister for Exports, which is who's Lord Offord of Garvell and Ian Wright. So it's comprised of representatives from DBT, devolved administrations, DEFRA, in trade organisations such as FDF and IMTA we've had today, and industry businesses such as myself at Smosco. And you mentioned that it's really important collaboration between government and industry. So it's an effective way of getting the two together to harness, to find the potential, the ambition to grow food and drink exports. And what we've done as a council is we've established 4 working streams to concentrate on making this ambition and passion happen. So I'll just quickly run through the working groups as they are. So one of them is information and communications, and that's about identifying and implementing areas where sharing expertise, information, funding, investment, things like resources can benefit food and drink companies. And what they're working on at the moment is a food and drink specific export guide to bring all that information into one place. The second group is a barriers group, looking specifically at sort of market access, any barriers that can constrain any export growth. So they're currently working on sort of the guidance and dealing with any access market issues. The marketing and promotion group is ensuring effective promotion and export support for businesses and any opportunity that there. And that group is currently working on developing new market guides specific to different markets and potential for different businesses. And a fourth group is the capability group, which is the work stream that I'm heavily involved in, and that capability is to identify and support the skills our businesses need to trade, and identify and see what their capabilities or capability gaps are, how to improve those, and grow ambition to export. And so within that group, we've also established a peer-to-peer program. We find this is really important. It's a great way to bringing businesses and industry together, to network, to learn from each other. And so part of the program is to roll out a peer-to-peer event regionally throughout the UK. Our first one was held at the Black Watch Museum in Perth in Scotland. We had an amazing turnout, and the feedback that we had from businesses and delegates who attended, I thought it was super beneficial. And the whole peer-to-peer program in itself it's the event, the day itself is run by industry. So the panelists, the keynote speakers, the hosts are all from businesses. So from from Smokesco or Walker Shortbread, whoever it is, and Nans, and whoever it is, the businesses the people that are attending are hearing straight from businesses themselves, or entrepreneurs, CEOs, or keynote figures in those businesses. It's interesting that you had a question around sampling, because we did a topic specifically around sampling in EU, which Laura held actually, and it was great. I think we ran it for about 15-20 minutes, and the information that she gave and the questions that were posed were great. And so it's things like that people are starting to learn off and gain experience. We also look at things like identifying key partners in target markets, or branding, implementing a business plan. So that was our first event, was in Scotland. So our second is in Cookstown in Northern Ireland on February the 6th, I believe. And I think, Will, have you got a link that you can share with everyone for that to register? And then we'll also be rolling out events in Wales, and an event in Wales in April, and one in Leeds in May.
Terrific, thank you, T. I have shared the link to the Northern Ireland event in the chat, and we can share it in the after event email as well. So yeah, thank you. It's great to hear what FDEC, I don't know if we're going for another acronym or just Food and Drink Exports Council, is up to. I know we had people at the Scotland event, and we'll be going to Northern Ireland as well ourselves, and from what I hear, it's a really great event. So yeah, do definitely go along, and just in case people want to find out more information about the council in general, where should people go to? So
there is information out there around the FDEC, we call it, for the Food and Drink Export Council. I can share some information with you. You can share with delegates today. So sort of the links, and to find out a bit more about the work that we're doing behind the scenes.
Terrific, thank you, T. Well, there are plenty of trade opportunities and challenges for both importers and exporters this year, but one thing you can hopefully rest assured is that there's plenty of support out there, whether it's through organisations like FDEC, FDF, and also today we've had the IMTA and associated some brands as well, like Samosa Co from Tea, and Associated British Foods as well, who do support fellow traders as well, and of course the Institute. But yeah, plenty of support out there, so please do hopefully feel a little bit inspired and energized by today's webinar, at least when it comes to international trade. However, it is time that we start wrapping up for today. So a huge thank you to T, Ian and Laura for your thoughts just now, and to Katrina and James earlier as well, to really interesting discussions which have certainly raised plenty of food for thought. Again, I don't apologise for the pun. One last poll we're going to run just as we draw to a close. This one asking if you'd like to receive further support from the Institute following today's webinar about some of the topics we've discussed today. The Institute has a wide range of support for members that is relevant and tailored to the food and drink sector, helping you to navigate BTOM and many more of the other changes and challenges coming up in the year ahead. This support includes a wide range of member-exclusive guides and insights, lunchtime learning webinars like one that's taking place on Thursday this week on new SPS rules, access to our technical helpline where you can get hands-on practical advice from our excellent team of experts, people like Laura, discounts on our SPS and exercise training courses and consultancy offerings, and a special interest group for the sector with online events and networking opportunities. So if this is of interest, do respond to the poll on screen, or you can find out all the details on export.org.uk, or even contact us at commercial@export.org.uk. A quick reminder to everyone that you will receive an email in the coming days with a link to the recording and a copy of the slides, as well as some of the useful information we've been discussing. As you leave the webinar, please do let us know what you thought of this session and any suggestions for topics for future Institute events by completing the short exit survey. But thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. And for now, bye-bye.